What's up guys, my name is Gabriel Velasco. In this tutorial I'm going to show you basically an introduction to test-driven development. It is a development strategy where you use a tool to write automated tests for your code. That tool that I will be using today is CppUTest. I'm going to download and install Git. I'm going to pull CppUTest and build it. And then we'll go over how to set up a project in Eclipse so that you can have your development build configuration using CppUTest. So you're writing all your code and you're building all your code, and then and the second build configuration, which is actually for your release or your target. In this case, it's going to be a console application. Hopefully later on I'll get to part 2 where I'll be actually using the BeagleBone at the same time. So I'll be writing the application for the BeagleBone that I have. But in this part, we're just going to go over 3 things: downloading and installing Git, pulling and building CppUTest, and setting up a project in Eclipse. So here we go.
Alright, so first things first, open up a terminal and we're gonna install Git. I already have Git, but this is just what you would do to get it. Awesome. Next thing you want to do, I hope this doesn't crash again, is set your username and email in Git. Oops, where did I mess up? Probably there. And then the same thing but for email. And now navigate to the folder where you're going to do your project. So in this case I'm going to make a directory. Actually, it looks like it already exists. Yeah, it already exists. Give me 1 second. Okay, so now that you're in your directory where you're going to make your project, you want to clone CppUTest into this directory. GitHub. Then we're going to configure CppUTest. So /configure. Oh, first you want to go into the folder where CppUTest exists, and then you want to configure. That would usually help. Alright, while this is configuring, then we're going to do a make, and then we're going to do a make check. So while all of this happens, talk about CppUTest. So as I said before, test-driven development is a process of developing code where you basically write a test and then write an automated test, and then write just enough code to pass that test, refactor the code, and then repeat that cycle. So this way you are developing every single line of code, and that in such a way that it's tested, always tested. So when you get into a huge project, you know that if you edit one part of the code and you break something, you'll have immediate feedback. Also, it's a confidence builder while you're developing code. At first, for me it was a little hard to get used to, but once I did, I felt really uncomfortable developing without it, because then you would have to write a bunch of code and then do a debug later process where you sit there clicking through each step and figuring out exactly what your code is doing. Instead, when you write a test and you write code to pass that test, you know that all your code is there for a purpose, not just because it's a line of code that you thought you might need. You're not writing code that you think you might need, you're writing code that you actually need. Because if you actually need to do something, you write a test for it. Alright, so now that that's done, let's open up Eclipse. Also, I'm not claiming that I know everything about CppUTest or test-driven development. I've used it not long enough, as long as I should, but this tutorial is kind of an introductory for myself and for everyone else, and I hope you find it useful. Okay, so now that we're in here, we're actually going to set up our project. First, we're going to set up a C++ project console application. Browse to wherever you made your directory for your project. Make that the location. Name your project whatever you want. In this case, I'm just going to keep it at example. Make it a Hello World C++ project with the Linux GCC toolchain. Hit finish. Once that's done, build it, make sure that it's building properly. Also run it, just to make sure that it actually does run properly as well. Oh, crap, wrong one. Delete that. Okay, you want to make a C++ application, and then just run it. Make sure that you get output console. This is just something that I do to make sure that I'm doing it properly. I also edit the code, build it again, and run it again, make sure that what I'm seeing is something that I'm actually editing. Cool. Alright, so this is where it gets a little tricky. You want to go into your project properties. We're going to make a different build configuration that's going to be for CppUTest. So you want to go to Manage Configurations, create a new configuration, give it a name. In this case, I'm going to name it TDD for Test-Driven Development. We're going to set that build configuration as active. Okay. Make sure that you change to that build configuration here, because this is where you're going to be editing the settings. I've left it in debug before and edited a bunch of settings and then wondered why it wasn't working. Uncheck to generate automatic makefiles, because we're going to be using our own makefile, and make the build directory the root of your project. Hit OK. Now we're going to go into CppUTest and copy some files that'll be useful. First, we're going to grab this makefile and put it into the root of our project. We're going to go back into examples from where we got the makefile, go under all tests, and then grab this alltest.cpp, copy it, make a new folder in our project. We're going to call it alltest as well, and paste your alltest cpp in there. First, we're going to edit the makefile. You want to edit the component name to be the same as your project name. So this comes from here. Next, we're going to edit the home of the CPPU. In this case, it exists in the CppUTest folder. Delete these few lines of code, because we're not going to be dealing with memory leaks here. And delete this, because it's old from the example project, and also from the include directories, because that is from another project. Awesome. So this is actually going to be our makefile. I know this doesn't look like a typical makefile. I believe that it just grabs the directories and then uses them as variables for this makefile. Don't hold me to it. I'm not an expert of makefiles or of how the makefile process works in CppUTest. But I know that whatever folder you put source in, it's going to go in here. All your tests source code is going to go in the test source directory, and any include libraries that you have, or include .h files that you might have, you put in here. Next, we're going to edit alltest.cpp. We don't need test plugin or test registry includes. We do not need this class, and we only need the command line test runner. That is the only thing that we need from this. We can also take out the application library alltest. So now, here's where I show you the difference between build configurations. So when I build here, it gives me this output. This means that CppUTest ran. As you can see, a bunch of new folders were made. Here is CppUTest running. It doesn't have any tests to run yet, so you automatically pass. Now to change the build configuration, we go back to debug and we build here. It's gonna say that, and you see how the build is different. So when we run this, it'll still give us tests. So that's building the same code in two different ways. Well, actually, we're not building the same code yet because we're only building this file here, which is not really being touched by CppUTest or by the application. First, let's write a test to make sure that CppUTest is working. So to do that, we're going to go into the all test folder. We're going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it testing sandbox. And inside testing sandbox, I'm going to create a new source file and call it tests sandbox as well. Open that up, and in here you're actually going to put some code in for CppUTest. Now, the code that I'm about to type in, you can find it in any of the examples from CppUTest, but this is just the bare minimum of what you actually need. We're going to say extern. If you were writing all your code in C++, you don't actually need this, but since most of the code that I develop is usually in C, all your C includes are going to be in here. So any .h file that references to, that is defined in a C file, you want to put it in here. Next is the test group macro. We're not going to fill that in yet. Okay, so let's explain this last part. This is a macro from CppUTest. Eclipse can't find the actual code right now, but it'll find it later. In here, you're going to put the name of what you're going to be testing. So if you were testing like an LED, for example, this is where you would put it. The code for an LED, this is where you would put it. In this case, the name is just test sandbox. I'm just going to write probably just one test to make sure that everything's building properly. So then we actually write our first test. And here we put the name of the test group that we're testing. The test group comes from up here. And this is another CppUTest macro. And then we create, we name the test. So in this case, I'm going to call it fail me, because we're going to create a test that fails no matter what. And this is another CppUTest macro. Awesome. I have a small feeling that this might not build, but let's give it a shot. Oh, so this is not building because we're in the wrong build configuration. That'll happen a lot. Build that again. Okay, so here's where it gets tricky. So you always want to make sure that your tests actually fail, and this is the first time. You're wondering, wow, this should fail automatically because this is a fail test. It's not failing because we haven't included this folder into the make file. So every time you make a new folder, you always have to remember to add it to your make file. In this case, we made testing sandbox. So I'm going to grab this name and put it in here. So now that that's there, we'll figure out why this isn't working. Alright, sorry about that. This is actually case sensitive, so you actually have to put the capital C, CppUTest. Careful with the caps. So this is the output that I was expecting. So as you can see, this test actually failed. So here we have error. It's CppUTest screaming at you, saying that this test failed. Now, we can ignore this test, and if we build again, it's going to tell me that it's okay. This exclamation mark means that one test was ignored. So that's how you set up your project for CppUTest and another build target. Hope you liked it. Hopefully in part 2 I will actually be doing some with the BeagleBone. Thanks very much. Bye bye.